Some secrets don't destroy families overnight, they rot them slowly, quietly, from the inside out. And my father's demand was the beginning of that decay. At first, it didn't even sound real. The words came out of his mouth so calmly, so deliberately, that for a moment, I thought I must have misunderstood him. I remember standing there, frozen, trying to process if I had actually heard what I just heard. You ever had a moment like that? When your world doesn't explode, it just tilts. Like suddenly gravity doesn't make sense anymore, and everything you thought you knew about someone starts to feel like a lie? That was me. That was the exact moment everything I believed about love, loyalty, and family came crashing down. It's strange, growing up, I used to think my family was perfect. We weren't rich, but we were together. We had Sunday dinners that lasted for hours, inside jokes no one else would understand, and a father who always seemed to have the right words when life felt confusing. He was my hero. The kind of man people respected, strong, disciplined, and gentle when he wanted to be. My mom adored him even on the days he came home tired and quiet. And I loved him the way only a daughter can love her father, with absolute, blind trust. But sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who end up shattering us completely. I didn't notice the cracks at first. Maybe I didn't want to. Little things, the way Mom's smile didn't reach her eyes anymore, the way Dad avoided her touch at dinner. I'd catch them sitting in silence, the TV flickering between them, pretending everything was fine. And I pretended too. Because pretending felt safer than asking questions I wasn't ready to hear answers to. But deep down, I knew something was off. Something cold had settled into our home, like an invisible weight pressing down on everyone, stealing the warmth from our laughter. Then came that night. The night my father called me into his study. His voice was steady, too steady. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad either. He looked tired. Like someone fighting a battle he didn't believe in anymore. And when he spoke, his words sliced through me like glass. He said, "I need you to do something for me." Just like that. So ordinary. So casual. But the thing he asked for, the thing that left me standing there, shaking, wondering if I even knew who this man really was, it's something no daughter should ever have to hear from her father. I still remember the way the air felt in that room, heavy, like it knew a secret I wasn't supposed to uncover. The ticking of the clock was loud enough to hurt my ears. And even though he was sitting right in front of me, I had never felt more distant from him in my entire life. You see, betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it comes from the person who raised you to believe they'd never hurt you. And when it does, it changes something inside you, permanently. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stared at him, hoping he'd take it back, hoping he'd laugh and tell me it was all a test, a bad joke. But he didn't. He just looked at me with those same calm eyes, and waited. When he said it, I thought he was joking. But that night, that very night, everything I knew about love, loyalty, and family, shattered into a million pieces. I wish I could tell you it ended there, but it didn't. What started as one unthinkable demand spiraled into a chain of lies, guilt, and choices that would break us apart forever. And if you've ever loved someone so deeply that their betrayal almost felt like losing a part of yourself, then you'll understand every word of what I'm about to tell you. You're watching Stories by TE. Subscribe now, because the truths people hide behind closed doors are sometimes the ones that haunt us the most. I guess before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand who we were, or at least, who we pretended to be. My name is Clara, and if you had met my family a few years ago, you would have thought we were the picture of happiness. We had the kind of home people admired, warm lights spilling through the curtains at night, a well-kept garden, and laughter that could be heard from the kitchen when neighbors walked by. But inside those walls, the air was heavy with things we didn't say out loud. My father, David, was the kind of man people respected, the kind that never missed church, never raised his voice in public, and never failed to remind you how family comes first. He had this quiet authority about him. The kind that made everyone straighten up when he walked into a room. But behind that calm voice and polished image was a distance, a kind of emotional wall that kept everyone, even us, from really knowing who he was. Then there was my mother, Elena. She was warmth personified, the kind of woman who made tea for neighbors going through a bad day, and remembered everyone's birthdays without needing a reminder. She held our home together like glue, with patience, with silence, with love that often went unnoticed. But I used to catch her sometimes, standing by the kitchen sink, staring into nothing, her hands still wet from washing dishes. Like her mind was somewhere else. Somewhere far away from us. And my little brother, Ethan, he was only 16 back then. Quiet, smart, but withdrawn. He used to talk a lot, tell Dad about his grades, his friends, his dreams. But over time, those conversations stopped. It was like he realized there was no space left for his voice in that house. As for me, I was the oldest. The responsible one. I'd learned early how to sense moods, to read silence. I could tell when my father was angry just by the way he set his cup on the table. I could tell when Mom was hurting by the way she forced a smile when he didn't come home for dinner. We still ate together, though, at least, we tried to. Those dinners were quiet. Painfully quiet. The kind of silence that's so thick you can hear the sound of forks scraping plates. Mom would ask Dad about work, and he'd answer with one-word replies, fine. Busy. Same as always. Then she'd glance at me or Ethan, trying to keep the peace. Trying to pretend the man sitting across from her wasn't slowly drifting out of reach. Sometimes, he'd be halfway through dinner before his phone buzzed. He'd look at the screen, sigh, and say something like, "It's urgent, I'll be right back." And we'd just watch him grab his jacket and disappear into the night. He always said he was working late. But the truth? He was working late a lot. And somehow, every time he came home, there was this faint scent that didn't belong to him, something floral, something soft. My mom noticed it too. But she never asked. Because that's the thing about my mom, she believed asking questions could break what little peace she had left. I used to believe my father was a good man. Not perfect, but good. He taught me how to ride a bike, how to keep my word, how to never let emotions cloud my judgment. But now I realize, that's exactly what he did. The house started to change in ways that didn't make sense. The laughter faded first. Then the trust. Then the feeling of safety. I remember one night vividly. Mom had cooked his favorite meal, roasted chicken with herbs. She even ironed his shirt before he got home. We waited for him till almost midnight. The food had gone cold. The candles burned down to nothing. When he finally walked through the door, he didn't even look sorry. He just said, "I told you I'd be late," kissed her on the forehead, and went straight to his room. I watched my mother's face crumble, quietly, painfully. And I hated him in that moment, even though part of me still loved him. Days turned into weeks, and the distance grew thicker. Mom started sleeping on the couch some nights, saying she fell asleep watching TV. Ethan stopped coming down for dinner altogether. And me? I became the middle ground, the quiet observer trying to keep everyone from falling apart. But no matter how hard I tried, the cracks kept widening. It was like living in a house with invisible walls, everyone isolated, pretending we could still hear each other through them. I used to tell myself it was just a rough patch, that every family goes through phases like this. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. There was something different about my father. His eyes didn't soften when Mom spoke anymore. His laugh, that deep, comforting laugh that used to fill the house, it was gone. And sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he'd stare at his phone and smile. A soft, private smile that wasn't meant for us. That smile haunts me till this day. Because it was the first sign of a secret I wasn't supposed to see. I thought I knew who he was. I thought our family could survive anything, but that was before I learned what he was hiding. Before I learned the truth about those late nights, the phone calls, and the woman whose name I didn't yet know. And before he made that unthinkable demand, the one that would force me to choose between the two people I loved most in this world. But I'll tell you something. When that moment came, I realized love can be just as destructive as hate. Because sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones who teach us how betrayal truly feels. I used to believe my father was a good man. Until the night he asked me to do something no daughter should ever hear from her father. And that was when the real story began. The night everything changed didn't begin with shouting. It began with silence, that kind of heavy silence that makes your heart race for no reason you can name. Mom was doing laundry in the living room, humming softly, folding clothes, when her phone buzzed. I was upstairs in my room, half asleep, when I heard her call out my name. Her voice sounded different. Tight. Controlled. "Clara," she said, "come here a moment." When I came down, she was standing there, holding Dad's jacket, the one he wore to meetings. Something small had slipped out of the inner pocket. A folded receipt. Not from a grocery store. Not from a restaurant we'd ever been to. It was from a hotel. The name printed on it sent a chill through me, the Sapphire. It was a place on the other side of town, one that everyone quietly knew wasn't exactly meant for overnight conferences. Mom stared at that piece of paper like it was a confession written in bold ink. I could see the war in her eyes, the part of her that wanted to believe it was innocent, and the part that already knew better. She didn't say a word for a long time. Just kept folding the same shirt over and over again, her fingers shaking slightly. Finally, she whispered, "Do you think, maybe it's a mistake?" I wanted to tell her yes. God, I wanted to tell her that. But the lie stuck in my throat. Because deep down, I knew. I'd smelled the perfume that wasn't hers. I'd seen the way his phone always faced down on the table. I'd watched his smile fade when he saw her name flash on the screen. It wasn't a mistake. It was proof. That night, she waited for him. Didn't eat. Didn't speak. Just sat in the dim light of the living room, the receipt folded neatly beside her like evidence in a trial she never wanted to hold. He came home past midnight. I could hear the jingle of his keys, the soft thud of his shoes by the door. Then, silence. And then her voice. Soft, too soft. "David, can we talk?" I stayed by the stairs, hidden in the dark, holding my breath. She asked him about the receipt. Calmly. Gently. Like a woman trying to give her husband a chance to tell the truth. He laughed. Not because it was funny, but because he didn't know what else to do. "Elena, you think I have time for that nonsense? It's a business dinner. Don't start imagining things." She didn't respond right away. Just stared at him, long enough that he grew uncomfortable. Then she said quietly, "Business dinners don't usually end at a hotel, David." There was a pause, thick and long enough to break something invisible between them. He sighed, walked past her, and said, "You're tired. Go to bed." And just like that, he ended the conversation. No explanation. No apology. Just a wall of arrogance and silence that left my mother standing there, heartbroken, humiliated, and still trying to believe the man she loved wasn't lying to her face. For the next few days, the tension in our house was unbearable. Dad avoided her completely, he'd leave before sunrise, come home after midnight. Mom barely spoke. She moved around the house like a ghost, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, pretending everything was fine. And me? I was stuck in the middle, trapped between loyalty and disgust, between love and truth. Then one evening, I came home from class and found Dad sitting alone in the living room. No TV. No lights. Just him, sitting there, staring into space. He looked different. Tired. Pale. Like the guilt had started eating at him, but he still refused to admit it. He didn't even look at me when he said, "Your mother's been asking too many questions lately." I didn't answer. He turned his head, finally meeting my eyes, and added, "You need to talk to her. Tell her to stop. Tell her to drop it, or she'll regret what she finds." I froze. His voice wasn't angry, it was cold. Measured. Like he'd thought this through. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I remember my heart pounding so loud I thought he could hear it. "Dad," I whispered, "what are you talking about?" He sighed, the way people do when they're pretending to be calm. "She's driving herself crazy, Clara. I don't want this family falling apart because of her paranoia. You're her daughter. You can make her understand." But that wasn't what I heard. What I heard was fear. Fear, not of losing my mother, but of losing control. That's when it hit me. My father wasn't trying to save the family. He was trying to save himself. After he said that, I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at him, the man who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, and I couldn't find him in the face in front of me anymore. He must have noticed the way I looked at him, because he suddenly leaned forward and said quietly, almost pleadingly, "Clara, families survive because they keep certain things buried. Don't dig where you shouldn't." That sentence still echoes in my head sometimes, especially on quiet nights. Because that was the moment I realized our family wasn't built on love anymore. It was built on secrets. Later that night, I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of my parents' voices in the next room, low, sharp, breaking. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel them, each one cutting deeper, leaving something shattered behind. And for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own father. Not because he might hurt us physically, but because I finally understood what kind of man he really was. A man who would rather manipulate his own daughter than face the truth. A man so terrified of exposure, he'd destroy everything, just to keep his image intact. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by my window, staring at the faint glow of the streetlights outside, feeling the kind of sadness that doesn't make you cry, it just numbs you. Because it wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about power, control, fear, and a family that was starting to crumble in silence. I wish I could tell you that was the worst of it, that his secret stayed buried after that. But the truth is, that was just the beginning. That was the first time I saw fear in my father's eyes, not fear of losing his wife, but fear of losing control. And what came after changed everything. I remember that night clearly. The house was silent, too silent. Mom was in the kitchen, pretending to be busy with dishes she had already washed twice. Dad sat in the living room, staring at the television, but his eyes weren't watching. And me? I sat in my room, clutching my phone, reading that message over and over again. "Always yours, Renee." 2 words. 2 simple words that tore open everything I thought I knew about love and family. At first, I told myself maybe it was a colleague. Maybe Renee was just a friend. But the way he looked at his phone that night, the small smile he tried to hide, it wasn't innocent. And that's when something cracked inside me. I kept thinking about the man I used to know, my father. The one who used to braid my hair before school because Mom's hands trembled too much in the mornings. The one who used to call me my sunshine. But lately, he'd turned into a stranger, someone who barely spoke, barely smiled. When he looked at me now, it wasn't warmth I saw. It was something else. Guilt. Maybe even fear. The next few days were unbearable. Mom stopped humming in the mornings. The air between them was thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. Ethan started skipping dinner altogether, locking himself in his room, pretending not to notice the tension. I felt trapped between them, like a rope pulled tight, ready to snap. Dad had made his demand clear, "Tell your mother to drop it." But how could I? How could I look into my mother's tearful eyes and tell her to stop looking for the truth? Every night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering who I was supposed to protect. My father, the man who taught me what honor meant. Or my mother, the woman who sacrificed her happiness for his pride? One night, I heard muffled sobs from my mother's room. I stood outside her door, my heart pounding, my hand trembling on the knob. But I couldn't go in. Because what would I even say? Mom, stop crying, Dad told me to tell you to forget everything? I felt disgusted with myself, for being too scared to stand up to him. For being too loyal to a man who was destroying us quietly. And then, I made the mistake of checking his phone again. This time, it wasn't just Renee. There were photos. Messages that no daughter should ever have to read about her father. He wasn't just lying. He was living a double life. But what broke me wasn't the affair itself. It was what he asked me to do next. He called me into his study the next evening, same stern face, same heavy silence. He closed the door behind me, locked it. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about an affair. This was about control. He leaned forward, voice calm but sharp. Clara. I need you to help me. You're mature. You understand how women can be emotional. Your mother, she's imagining things. I need you to talk to her, convince her I'm innocent. I stared at him, my throat dry. He smiled, that same distant smile. You're my daughter, Clara. You owe me that. My stomach twisted. Owe him? I wanted to scream, to tell him no, to tell him how much he was hurting her, hurting us. But the words got stuck in my chest. Because deep down, a part of me still loved him. Still believed maybe he'd come back to the man I used to know. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in my head. You owe me that. And I started wondering. What kind of father asks his daughter to lie for him? What kind of man hides behind the innocence of his child to cover his own sins? I felt sick, like I was drowning in secrets I didn't ask to carry. Every look from my mother felt like an accusation. Every silence from my father felt like manipulation. I knew something darker was coming. Something that would force me to choose, not between right and wrong, but between the people I loved most in this world. But it wasn't Renee who broke our family. It was what my father asked me to do next, something that would stain my hands with a guilt I could never wash off. After that night in my father's study, I started seeing the world differently. It's strange how secrets change the air around you, how silence suddenly feels louder, how every word sounds rehearsed. Mom still cooked breakfast every morning, pretending nothing was wrong. Dad still kissed her on the cheek before leaving for work. And I just watched. Pretending too. Pretending that our family wasn't quietly dying from the inside out. But pretending doesn't make the truth disappear. It started small, the way Mom's eyes followed him as he left the house. The way she waited longer at the window. Then one day, I found her in his study, flipping through papers, her hands trembling. When she noticed me standing at the door, she smiled, that sad kind of smile that hides more pain than it reveals. She whispered, I just need to know, Clara. If I'm crazy, or if he's really doing this to me. She had found a receipt. A hotel receipt. 2 nights in a city 3 hours away. Under the name David Collins. But what broke her heart wasn't the receipt, it was the perfume smell still lingering on his shirt when she confronted him later that night. I remember standing at the top of the stairs, hearing their voices from the living room. Mom's voice was soft, desperate. Dad's, sharp. Controlled. Mom, just tell me the truth, David. Please. I can handle the truth. Dad, the truth? The truth is, you've been cold for years, Elena. You pushed me away. That sentence. That one sentence cut through the house like lightning. Mom didn't scream. She just went quiet. And I felt something break, not just between them, but inside me. Because for the first time I saw my father not as the man who raised me, but as the man who destroyed her. Later that night, he came to my room again. The same knock. The same tension in his voice. He sat on the edge of my bed, his eyes dark and tired. Clara, he said softly, I told her the truth. But you know how your mother is. She'll twist everything. I need you to be strong for me, okay? Promise me you won't tell her anything else you might have seen. I stared at him, numb. He was asking me to lie again. But this time, he wasn't asking me as his daughter. He was asking me as his confidant, his accomplice. And that's when I realized, my father didn't just want forgiveness. He wanted loyalty, blind, unquestioning loyalty. The following weeks were a blur. Mom stopped eating dinner with us. Dad worked later than ever. Ethan, my younger brother, started sleeping at his friend's house more often. I tried to hold everything together, but the more I tried, the more it fell apart. I'd walk into a room and feel the tension before anyone said a word. Mom would look at me like she knew I was hiding something. And maybe she did. Because every time she asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" I looked away. The guilt was unbearable. I was lying to the only person who ever truly loved me. And for what? To protect a man who couldn't even be honest with his own wife? Then one night, everything came crashing down. I came home from school to find Mom sitting on the couch, a letter in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen. She didn't even look up when I called her name. "Mom?" I whispered, walking closer. That's when I saw it, Dad's phone on the table, unlocked. And on the screen, the messages. Dozens of them. Photos. Voice notes. Renee telling him she missed him. That she couldn't wait to be his wife. It was all there. Mom looked up at me slowly, her voice breaking. "How long have you known, Clara?" I froze. I wanted to tell her everything, that I was scared, that he'd manipulated me, that I didn't know what to do. But the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, silent. And in that silence, I lost her. She took a deep breath, folded the letter carefully, and stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just said, "I can't do this anymore." Then she walked into her room, packed her suitcase, and left. I found the letter the next morning. It was short. Written in her delicate handwriting. "To my children, I hope one day you understand that leaving doesn't always mean giving up. Sometimes, it's the only way to survive. Love, Mom." I sat there, holding the letter, my hands shaking. The walls felt like they were closing in. The air was too heavy to breathe. And when Dad came home that evening, he didn't even ask where she went. He just poured himself a drink and said quietly, "She made her choice. Now we move on." Move on. As if he hadn't just destroyed everything we were. That night, I realized something. Infidelity doesn't just break hearts, it rewires the soul. It makes you doubt love, family, and even yourself. And as I watched my father pour another drink, pretending not to care, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the beginning of the damage he'd done. When my mother finally found out, she didn't scream. She just packed her bags, and left a letter I'll never forget. But what she didn't know, was that my father's betrayal was about to take an even darker turn. The night after my mother left, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt hollow. Like every piece of laughter, every memory, had been stripped from the walls. I tried to pretend it wasn't real. I tried to tell myself she'd come back, that maybe, somehow, we could still fix it. But then, I found the second letter. Not the one she left for us, the one she left for him. It was tucked into the drawer of his study, sealed but unhidden, as if she wanted him to find it, but didn't care how long it took. And when I read it, I finally understood why she couldn't stay. "David, you didn't just betray me. You betrayed your brother. You betrayed the blood that trusted you. I found out who she is, who Renee really is." "How could you? After all these years?" I froze. My heart started pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself breathe. Renee, my father's mistress, wasn't some random woman. She was his late brother's wife. My aunt. I felt the room spin around me. My knees buckled, and before I knew it, I was on the floor, clutching the letter like it might burn me. My mind refused to believe it. He hadn't just broken his vows to my mother, he had desecrated my uncle's memory. A man he once called his best friend. A man whose funeral he stood at, holding Renee's hand and promising to look after her. Now I knew what that meant. Now I knew what looking after her really was. That night, when he came home, I couldn't hold it in any longer. He walked into the kitchen, loosened his tie, and reached for his glass of whiskey, the same ritual he'd kept every night since Mom left. I stood in the doorway, shaking, the letter clutched in my fist. He looked up. "Clara? What's wrong?" My voice cracked before I could form the words. "Renee?" His eyes froze. He didn't answer. He didn't even blink. So I stepped forward, holding out the letter. Was she really Uncle Martin's wife? Silence. That kind of silence that screams louder than any word ever could. He finally looked at me, and for a split second, I saw fear. Real, naked fear. "Clara," he began, voice trembling slightly, "you don't understand." "Don't tell me I don't understand," I shouted. The sound of my own voice startled me. It was the first time I'd ever yelled at him. "You lied to Mom. You lied to us. You were with her? Your brother's wife?" He slammed his glass on the counter, shattering it. "Enough," he yelled. "You think you know everything, but you don't. She was lonely, Clara. I was there for her when no one else was. You were supposed to be there for your wife." I screamed back, tears streaming down my face. "She loved you, Dad. She loved you enough to destroy herself keeping your secrets." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't," but then his voice dropped to a whisper. "She understood me in ways your mother never did. And that was it." The last thread snapped. I stepped back, my chest heaving, every muscle trembling with rage and heartbreak. He looked at me with those same eyes that once told me bedtime stories. But now all I saw was a stranger. A weak, broken man hiding behind excuses. I backed toward the door, still clutching the letter. "Do you even hear yourself?" I said, my voice shaking. "You ruined everything. You ruined her. You ruined us." He didn't move. He just stared, this hollow, defeated look spreading across his face. And in that moment, I realized something I never wanted to believe: my father wasn't sorry. He was only sorry he got caught. I turned and ran upstairs, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Every step felt like a weight crushing my chest. And when I finally reached my room, I collapsed on the floor and screamed into my pillow, the kind of scream that doesn't make a sound but tears your soul apart from the inside. That was the night everything shattered completely. No more pretending. No more illusions of family or honor or love. Just truth, cold, ugly, unforgiving truth. They say once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And they're right. Because from that night on, I could never look at my father the same way again. The man who once tucked me in, who kissed my forehead goodnight, was now the man I couldn't stand to be in the same room with. He broke us. Not with violence. Not with words. But with a choice, a selfish, unthinkable choice that would echo through every part of our lives. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought began to grow inside me. If he could destroy everything we had so easily, then maybe destruction was the only language this family understood. Don't miss what happens next, the secret that turned guilt into vengeance, and vengeance into something far darker. Subscribe to Stories by TE now, because what follows isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about what happens when love turns into punishment. After that night, the confrontation, everything fell apart in slow motion. No shouting. No dramatic exits. Just silence. A silence that crawled through the walls and seeped into our bones. Mom was gone. Her phone off. Her friends didn't know where she went. Weeks passed, and all we had were unanswered calls and an empty side of the bed. The house felt colder. Her perfume still lingered in the air, that soft scent of vanilla and lavender, but it only reminded me of what she'd left behind. It was like her absence became a ghost that lived with us, haunting every room she once filled with warmth. Dad. He changed completely. The man who used to wake up early for work now spent mornings sitting in his study with a bottle of whiskey half empty by 10 a.m. He'd stare at old family photos like he was searching for a version of himself he'd already buried. Sometimes I'd hear him muttering, "She'll come back. She always does." But she didn't. And every night, he drank a little more. Spoke a little less. And the man I once called Dad faded further into someone I barely recognized. I had to grow up overnight. The bills. The meals. The groceries. Even keeping Ethan in school became a fight. My little brother didn't talk much anymore. He'd come home from school, drop his bag, and lock himself in his room, pretending he couldn't hear the muffled arguments that still echoed between Dad and me. One night, I caught him crying quietly in the dark. When I asked what was wrong, he just whispered, "People are talking about us, Clara. They said Dad, they said he cheated on Aunt Renee." My throat closed up. Even the neighbors knew. The whispers had started. At the grocery store. At church. You could feel them, the looks, the pity, the judgment. Everywhere we went, people lowered their voices when we passed. We weren't the Collins family anymore. We were the scandal. The disgrace. And I carried all of it. Every tear my mother cried. Every secret my father told me to keep. Every stare from people who didn't know the full story but acted like they did. I was holding a house that had already burned down. And some nights, I'd sit at the kitchen table after everyone was asleep, tracing the edge of that letter Mom left behind. Reading the same line over and over again. Leaving doesn't always mean giving up. Sometimes, it's the only way to survive. I began to wonder if she was right. If maybe staying, pretending, protecting, forgiving, was the real kind of giving up. Dad's drinking got worse. So did his temper. Sometimes he'd shout at me for nothing, accusing me of turning against him, of siding with Mom. Other times, he'd sit in silence, eyes red, slurring apologies I didn't believe anymore. It wasn't anger I felt toward him anymore. It was pity, mixed with something darker. Resentment. Because no matter how broken he was, I was the one left to clean up the mess. Ethan needed comfort. The bills needed paying. And our so-called family name, the one he was so desperate to protect, was now nothing but a bitter joke. I thought I had seen the worst of it. The affair. The lies. The shame. But I was wrong. Because one night, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my father made one more demand. That night, when Dad called me into the living room, I already knew something was wrong. He was sober, the first time in weeks. The whiskey bottle sat unopened beside him, the glass untouched. For a moment, I almost felt relief, until I saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't regret. It wasn't pain. It was desperation, the kind that disguises itself as love. He took a deep breath and said, "Clara, I need you to call your mother. Tell her to come home." At first, I thought I misheard. After everything that happened, the betrayal, the humiliation, the letter, he wanted her back? I asked why. He said he'd change. He said he'd stop drinking. He said he'd make things right. But his voice cracked only once, not when he said he missed her, not when he said the house felt empty without her, but when he whispered, "People are talking, Clara. You know what they're saying about me." That's when I understood. He didn't want her back because he loved her. He wanted her back because losing her had made him lose control. His pride, his reputation, his illusion of being the perfect man, all slipping through his fingers. And now, he wanted to use me to get it back. I sat there in silence, rain tapping on the windows like it was echoing my heartbeat. He was staring at me, waiting. I could feel the weight of his expectations pressing against my chest, the same father who once told me that truth mattered more than anything. And yet, here he was, asking me to help him keep a lie alive. The words tasted like acid when I said, "You don't want her, Dad. You just don't want to look bad." He flinched. Then came the anger, sharp, defensive. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound slicing through the quiet. "You don't understand marriage, Clara. You're too young to know what people forgive for the sake of family." But I did understand. I understood more than he thought. Because I had watched my mother shrink herself into forgiveness for years. Watched her smile through insults. Watched her cook dinner for a man who forgot her birthday. And now, he wanted me to drag her back into the same prison. I went to my room that night and stared at my reflection in the window. The rain outside blurred my face, I couldn't tell if it was the glass or my own tears. How do you forgive a man who taught you everything about honesty, and then uses you to protect his lies? How do you keep loving someone who taught you love should never hurt, and yet made hurt the language of your home? I wanted to hate him. But part of me still saw the father who used to hold my hand when crossing the street. The one who danced with Mom in the kitchen when he thought no one was watching. The one who called me sunshine before school every morning. And maybe that was the hardest part, realizing that the same person who gave you your first sense of safety could also be the one who destroys it. Days passed, and I didn't call her. Not because I didn't want her back, but because I didn't want to bring her back to a place that had already killed her spirit. Dad stopped asking eventually. But the silence between us grew thicker, heavier. Every dinner felt like a funeral for the people we used to be. The table that once held laughter now held nothing but the sound of forks scraping plates. Ethan barely looked up. And sometimes I caught Dad staring at the door, as if he was waiting for it to open and undo everything. But it never did. One evening, I found myself sitting at that same table, alone. The rain hadn't stopped. It felt like even the sky was tired of holding it in. I thought about Mom's letter again. About the words I'd ignored. And I realized something I wasn't ready to face before. My silence didn't make me innocent. It made me part of it. I saw the way she suffered. I saw the signs, the nights she cried in the bathroom, the mornings she couldn't meet his eyes. And I said nothing. Because silence was easier. Because pretending was safer. But silence is its own kind of betrayal. And I was guilty too. If I had spoken sooner, maybe my family would have survived. Or maybe it would have broken sooner. I'll never know. You know, sometimes I still hear the echo of that night. The rain. The silence. The way the house felt too big, too cold. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or broken plates, sometimes it just comes with silence that refuses to leave. I kept wondering. Did I do the right thing? Did staying silent make me loyal, or did it make me just like him? Because the truth is, when you're caught between love and honesty, there's no way to walk away clean. Someone always gets hurt. And sometimes, that someone is you. Tell me something. If you were me, standing in that living room, watching your father's lies tear your mother apart, what would you have done? Would you protect his secret to keep the family together? Or would you tell your mother the truth, knowing it might destroy everything you've ever known? Pause, one beat of silence, rain sound clearer. There's no right or wrong answer. There's only what your conscience can live with. So tell me, what would your conscience choose? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Your words remind me that no story ends alone, someone out there always understands your pain, your silence, your guilt. And if this story touched you, if it made you question what loyalty really means, then don't forget to subscribe to Stories by TE. Turn on the bell icon, because the next story might just change how you see love, betrayal, and loyalty forever. It's been 3 years since that night. 3 years since I last heard my father's voice echo through this house. He passed away not long after my mother left, and the strangest part is, when I stood over his grave, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel sadness. I just felt empty. Maybe because betrayal doesn't kill love, it drains it slowly, until all that's left is exhaustion. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I had told the truth earlier. Would my mother have stayed? Would my father have changed? Or would everything have fallen apart sooner, but cleaner? Maybe that's the thing about silence, you think it's protecting peace, when really, it's just protecting pain. My father once told me, families only survive when everyone plays their part. But what he never said was, some roles were never meant to be played by daughters. Because when you start carrying secrets that aren't yours to hold, they begin to live inside you, like a shadow that never fades. He taught me that betrayal doesn't always begin with lies, sometimes, it begins with silence. And silence can destroy more than words ever could. So if love ever asks you to sacrifice your truth, walk away, before it breaks you too. This was my story, but maybe, in some way, it's yours too. Because behind every broken family, there's someone who stayed quiet for too long. You've been watching Stories by T.E. Subscribe now for more real stories that expose the fragile threads holding families together.